Hi, good evening, and thank you for joining us on day 237 at GGY. We have a very special guest with us here today, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, very welcome.
Before we get on to our conversation with you, I just want to acknowledge the fact that we have a fairly large team here today who's come to see you mostly, because when we do this without a guest, it's very lonely. It's maybe 3 or 4 of us. But also, I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who turned up last Sunday. We had the counter-protest, is that what we call it? Was it a counter-protest? The response to the mob attack that happened at GGY on day 234. 234 was the protest that we couldn't have, but we're counting it as a protest day, because that's when it would have been 234. But it was really amazing to see the response that we had subsequent to the mob attack. We were, people, reached out to us from the NPP. Rai spoke to us, and Kaushi and Eranga were actually there. So very grateful to them. SJB, I think Chamit was there. We had so many activists, including Anuruddha, Melanie, PR, Hijaz Hezbollah came as well. And we had lots of friends, we had lots of neighbors, well-wishers all turning up, basically standing up for the right to free speech. I mean, our protest was themed around the shrinking civic space. And so it was good that, so many people were able to unite on that particular day, putting aside sort of partisan politics to stand up for our fundamental rights, basically, right?
Anything else you would like to know? Yes, yeah. So let's get to our numbers here. I'm going to give my leader of the Wikipedia page. So for consistency, because that's what I've been doing in this. So it says here that you're one is activist, university lecturer and politician. He is serving as a nationalist member of parliament for the Nationalist People's Party. He has served as a senior lecturer at the Department of Social Studies at Local University of Shanghai. Represented the NPP since 2019, and you're a top bishop here. That one doesn't mean
So ideologically, I think you're left of center. You would consider yourself a liberal, I believe, right? Would you say that? Progressive. You then look for research on issues such as youth unemployment, gender inequality, child protection, and inefficiencies in Sri Lankan education system. And also, since you're currently running, you were the member of the board of directors of NEST. So we needs to update its page. So before we get started, Harry, since you asked us to videos, Harry, I want to give you an opportunity to, because there are a lot of misconceptions about the NPP and the JDP. NPP is essentially seen as somebody had mentioned in my questions, as a Trojan horse for the JDP. How do you address that? We'll just give you a few minutes to address the most common misconceptions about the NPP that's kind of, that pervades society at the moment.
Yeah, so like you said, one is that NPP is actually the JDP under a different name. Yeah. That's not true. The JDP as a political party still functions. NPP consists of about 20-25 organizations and small political parties. Sure, the JDP is the largest party within the NPP, but it's certainly not the JDP, right? And the decision-making process, the leadership is independent to the JDP. So we have our own structure. We have our steering committee, and we have an executive body, and that is constituted by people from all, representing all the different organizations and movements that are part of the NPP. So, and our decision-making process is that we all bring in different points of view to the steering committee, and we collectively decide on what we do and what our directions and our political strategies are. Sure, I mean, the JVP being the largest and I would say the group with the most political experience, their voice counts a lot, even though so in the steering committee you have 2 from each organization, and the JVP also has only 2, right? But I mean,
so each organization gets 1 vote? I mean, is that how it works?
No, so each individual
gets 1.
We've never had to vote for anything.
Okay.
We've kind of been able to work
I
on
mean,
consensus.
so both style, if it was a board.
Yeah, then it would be one vote per person, right? And it's 2 people from each organization, right? Okay. So, and that's how we kind of, that's the decision-making body, and then the Executive Council implements the decisions that are taken. The Executive Council consists of representatives from all 25 districts, right? So at each district, we formed a district committee. The district committee is made up of the smallest unit that the NPP structure has, which is at the Brahmaniladari division. We have an NPP committee, and then representatives from that come into the local, the electoral division, and from that to the district committee, right? So it's this structure was set up maybe over the last 2 years or so. I mean, we started only in 2019. So that's the structure. So it's not the JVP under a different name.
But the perception is that, right?
Perception is that.
How do you change that?
Because it's partly the media also, and I've stopped correcting the media. I'm often introduced as the JVP MP, although we've contested in Parliament in all the elections since 2019 as the NPP. In the Parliament, we are recognized as the NPP, but we'll still be referred to as the JVP, right? So it's partly deliberate, partly because the well-known faces in the NPP, or the people that the general public recognize more easily, are from the JVP, right? But I say it's partly deliberate also because it's usually our opponents who will refer to us as the JVP, because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that we are a bigger group, right? And they would like to associate the NPP with the negative images of the JVP, whether rightly or wrongly, but they would try to, say, well, we're one and the same, so it's really not changed, right? I think some of the other misperceptions are because of, and that's like a complicated issue, I'm not sure we can go into all of this, but I think it's also to do with people's understandings of what a left movement is, or what Marxist politics or leftist politics are about, right? So if you remember, there was this furor, mainly on social media, that when under an NPP government, we would take over everybody's property, right? Which is ridiculous, right? I mean, there were responsible people from the opposition saying, watch out, when they form a government, they're going to come and take over your house. I mean, what would we do?
So you're categorically saying that is not going to be the case?
I mean, that's ridiculous. What would we do with everybody's houses, right? I mean, honestly, what would we do, right? So that, there are things like that. There are really false conceptions about what a left government is, what socialism is about, what communism is about, because unfortunately most people's understandings of left politics is based on Russia or China.
Or Cuba, Venezuela. I mean, they'll cite more extreme sort of examples.
Or the most extreme versions of it. But also what needs to be recognized is that all of those are models, sort of takes on socialism, right? That is not the only model of socialism that you can have or that you will find, right? So
generally speaking, I mean, or theoretically, every country is supposed to come up with its own model, like as much as liberal democracy. You don't find the same model of liberal democracy in every country, right? It is adapted to the specific, to that specific context. Likewise, socialism, right? So it comes from that perception also, that it will be state, you know, like state-driven, centrally planned, like what was in Russia, that there'll be, you know, the Soviets that basically run everybody's lives. That's people's experience, or that's
Perception.
where perceptions about the left come up also.
Is there anything that you can point to and say this is the closest in terms of the governance model that a socialist government would look like?
No, I would
that
say
we can sort of identify with?
Well, see, it's the kind of model that will probably have to be applied in Sri Lanka is a combination of socialism and also democracy, right? That's also because of the particular trajectory of a country. If you think of Russia, or even if you think of China, they were never democracies to begin with. Russia became a communist state following on from the Tsars, right? Similarly in China. So it was never a multi-party country to start with. Now in Sri Lanka it's totally different. We've had a multi-party system for years, ever since we got the franchise. So you can't revert that and go back to a single party rule. That's not how it will work here, right? So now see the situation in Chile. Chile has an elected left-wing government, right? I would think that's, in terms of a governance model, that's probably an example, right? They have a parliament, they elected a left-wing government, right? And that's how it's run. I mean, Chile also had Allende, who was also elected, right? And then he was assassinated by U.S. left force, but that's an elected government. That's left-wing. I mean, most Latin American...
Would the Scandinavian countries be...
Scandinavian countries, in terms of their social welfare policies, in terms of how their economy is run, right? I hesitated to refer to those countries as our models simply because their history and their economic situation is so drastically different, and it would be an unfair comparison to say that we can, emulate them.
Well, I think in terms of taxation, we're pretty much almost there right now.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the only thing we have in common, right, at the moment. So yeah, but yes, I mean, many of the welfare or the sort of the social protection measures would be similar, right? But then, they also have monarchy. We don't.
They do, yeah.
Right? Some of those countries. Anyway.
I'm going to just latch on to two things that you just said. You said people have a misconception about communism and Marxism. So, does that mean that that's where some people will probably latch on to what she said, because you just use those
whether NPP
whether okay, so we have a misconception of communism there, but will we be going to a communist style government, is what somebody might say, when she said,
or Marxist style.
Or Marxist. So
well, no.
Socialism is fine, and having a socialist or a left of center government is, I think, what we need. But do we need a communist government?
Communism is not a state that can be achieved in one country, but that's an international it's a governance model for internationally. It's not something you can take on as here there's communism, there's communism. It's very different. It's something that's in the future, right? What you have seen in most parts of the world is a form of socialism, right? You can't have left-wing politics without talking about Marx, because Marxist, that's where the ideology comes from, right? So you can't sort of say left-wing but you're not you're not influenced by Marx. It's Marxist theory that informs left ideology, and there's a spectrum of the left, right? How far left you want to be, right? And one of the things that's very, it's in sort of, I'm not a theoretician, that's not my area of expertise, Marxist theory or communist theory for that matter. But one of the things that that is stated very clearly is that Marxist theory has to be adapted to the context of, it has to be context specific. So Marx gave some kind of a theoretical explanation about how the market works, and he spoke, the examples he drew from were very much from industrialized England, the UK, Europe, right? So it was actually Lenin who transformed that into practice. Like, how do you actually implement that in a country? Marx is theoretical. He was like, and Marxist theory is still taught. I used to teach Marxism in sociology because it's so influential in terms of the sort of different theoretical threads, right? But it was Lenin who primarily turned it in, Mao, who actually then tried to run a country based on Marxist ideology, right? So in that sense, you could say that in Sri Lanka, that was attempted by other left, the LSSP, the Communist Party, the JVP, are all based on that ideology, but they each have their own interpretation of what would work in Sri Lanka, right? NPP, I would say, is a progressive center-left movement, if you want to put a label to it, right? But we really resist those labels because, for one thing, you have to start from where we are at the moment, right? And it's about, and for us, it's about addressing the current issues and the problems that people are facing based on certain principles. So what would those principles be? Social justice, equity and equality, and sort of enabling the potential for human beings to flourish, right? Where no one is left behind, no one is left out, right? That everyone feels included in what happens in a society, right? And how do we propose to do that? Well, economically, our economic policy is based on what we would call economic democracy. So participation in the economy, everyone gets the opportunity to participate in the economy, and everyone then gets a fair share of the benefits of that economy. Democracy and rule of law, right? Anti-corruption, and also a strong social protection system, right? So that is what we want. That is what we are going to do. Those are what our policies consist of, right? So anyone wants to put us into a particular box, go right ahead, right? But I don't think those boxes are really helpful at this stage because they come with so much baggage and so much history which is nothing to do with what we are doing right now or what we want to do right now.
How would you, this participation and use of equity and equality, that's the I would say the upper strata where it comes to people. That also wouldn't be the right word, but let's say the lumbering. Is there fear that this whole thing of taking over properties and all, you're going to take my property and give it to so and so. What would you?
How distribution of wealth?
Yes.
Right. That is the.
We need redistribution of wealth, but it's not. But we don't need not if you want to take somebody's wealth and give it to somebody else.
No.
What is your policy and how would you?
So first of all, we're not Robin Hood. We don't take from the rich and give the poor. That's not how it works.
That's what I was saying.
That's not Robin Hood.
Yes.
Right? That's not us.
So it is a socialist thing.
Ravindra.
Well, I don't know. I would hesitate to call him so. Anyway, right, let's not get into that. But what we want to do is to enable the economy so that there can be more people who can participate in it gainfully, right? I mean, I'll give you a specific example. Right now, if you think about the economic opportunities that are available in this country, I think we would have to acknowledge that most of those economic opportunities are concentrated in cities, and we have very few cities also, right? If you think of someone who grew up in Ridimalayadda, right? What are the opportunities that are available to him or her to engage in a livelihood that's actually meaningful and actually allows him or her to flourish? Pretty limited, right? So when we say we want an economy that everyone can participate in, that's what we mean, that the economy should not be limited to certain strata or certain geographical areas, but expand in a way that there's more participation, right? What do we mean by the fact that then the benefits have to be distributed not equally, equitably, right? Because equally is difficult. I mean, that doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. Equitably, it means that there are certain things, for example, there will be taxes. We would also have taxes, right? But then the taxes that are collected would need to come back to society in terms of services that are essential for people's well-being, right? So we would think about education and health, public transport. Just taking those three as examples, we think that everybody needs to have access to those three things. Not just any access, but access to quality education, quality health, and a good public transport system, right? So that would be one way in which the playing field gets evened out. It shouldn't matter that you went to Ridimalayadda at the Mahavidyalaya as opposed to Royal College for you to have a decent chance in life, right? So it is about making sure that everybody gets a fair chance in life through the kinds of services that you provide for people to be able to, really grow based on their potential, right?
Yeah. Generally, things like health and education becomes enablers for social mobility, right? So I think,
just for a good life, for a decent life, right? So those things we think need to be made available to all, right? In a way that, and it's not, someone could argue that right now everyone has access to education, but everyone doesn't have access to good quality education, right? Everyone doesn't have a chance of making sure that the education they get will lead them towards towards a decent form of livelihood, right? So those are the things we would want to correct.
How would you do that?
Investing in those sectors, right? Investing in those sectors because we think that's what a government is there for, right? A government is there to make sure that the economy and society works for everyone and not just a few, right? So it's about, managing the economy and managing those sectors in ways that that give people a fair chance. Now, the challenge that we have is that we are in a midst of not just an economic crisis, but a situation where all those institutions have practically been dismantled, right? So we have to build those institutions, we have to recover some of those institutions, plus we are in the midst of an economic crisis where our deficit is ballooning, we have a huge loan payments to be made. Right now we are not repaying our loans, right? We are still defaulting, right? What happens when we start having to pay back those loans once the restructuring takes place? So that means we have very little maneuvering space for all of this. So we think that the first 2 years of an NPP government will be fundamentally about stabilizing the system, right? Now, one of the things that we find problematic in the current approach is that It's austerity but no growth, right? And the austerity is being dealt out to people who can least afford to live those. I mean, they are having to cut back on their basic essentials, food, education, and health, right? I mean, there's nothing more that they can give up, right? So there needs to be some, and there needs to be some recognition of what that suffering entails, and share that burden more equally, right?
So right now, I think what we see is that people who are already burdened are becoming even further burdened.
Yeah.
And we are seeing a lot of people fall through the sort of the economic net, the social safety net, with disconnections and all of that. But at the same time, the justification for that again is what the word used, stability.
Yeah.
To bring stability, right? I mean, under that guise, we have things like the SSOE restructure happening, the budgets that have been just presented, and all of that. Now, under NPP administration, say you come into power, there is an acknowledgement that the SOEs need to be restructured.
Yes.
Right? And one thing that's been seen as an impediment to that is the role of trade unions. Now, another misconception maybe you want to address is how the trade unions and even the student unions are linked to leftist sort of Marxist movements and linked directly to the JVP as well, maybe not quite to the NPP. So how would you tackle, one, the subject of things like SOE restructure, and also how would you handle these overstuffed institutions that we have? I mean, I think everybody acknowledges that our institutions are overburdened with, successive governments have basically put people in those places and all of that, and they have now unionized. How would you tackle these two issues?
Okay, so SOEs, all right, let me put it this way. Let's take a step back. We think we need a strong and efficient and responsive public sector, right? You can't run a country. I think it would be ridiculous to think that you can run a country without a strong public sector, right? You need an effective public sector. So restructuring the public sector doesn't necessarily mean you privatize everything, right? There are certain things that the private sector does better, which they should be allowed to do. There are certain things which the government can do, which the government should do. And there are other forms of running institutions also, which should be, there could be public-private partnerships, there could be cooperative movements, there are lots of other models that can also be experimented with in that restructuring process. As NPP, we would decide on which of those models need to be applied to which of those enterprises, depending on the strategic importance in the overall running of the country, right? So, for example, we think like, let me take a very easy example, the hospitality sector. There's no role for the government. The government should not be running hotels and guest houses and whatnot. That the private sector does much better. Why get involved at all, right? But take something like the banking sector, the financial sector. We think the state has a role to play there, because in order to make sure that there is stability, that there is protection for those who may not be able to participate in it as strongly as others, there needs to be some government intervention, right? That's not to say that it's completely government owned, but the government has a role. We think in the energy sector, government has a role to play, because it's also something to do with national security, right? And government will have a role. There might be other areas like...
Sorry, can I just jump in quickly on the banking side? Now, we see right now in state banks where they're writing off loans given to the private sector.
Yeah.
Aren't you opening the door to more of that if the state
that's
is controlling?
the mistake I think that a lot of us make, in thinking that it is the fact that it's whether it's public or private that determines. Okay, sorry.
So that's Chiranda, by the way. He's our official photographer for the day.
I thought that was lightning for a moment. Okay, that it's the fact whether it's publicly owned or privately owned that makes the difference between whether something is run efficiently or not.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think that's the only criteria. Why are state banks writing off loans or doing all of what you said it does? And that's because of political interference. That's the political culture that has made those institutions function so inefficiently, right? So it's what you need to change is the political culture. If the political culture doesn't change, even if you privatize, that same political culture will make sure that the privately run banks also can't run in the way that it should, right? Because we are all talking about privatization as if it's a new thing. It's not. It started in the 80s. I mean, if that was what was the answer to our problems, right, then why are we still talking about it, right? So that is not where the problem lies. The problem lies with our political culture. That has to change fundamentally.
I think we all agree on that.
Right? And when I say that the political culture needs to change, it also means that there needs to be a new social contract between the government, between the state and its citizens, right? We also think, and I mean that also means then that more accountability, more transparency, more citizen engagement, which is precisely what you guys are doing, right? That you're held, you feel much more accountable to your constituents. But you can't just say that. You can't just say that and let it happen. There need to be specific ways in which that can be realized, right? So for us, we are thinking of things like introducing the right to recall, right? Introducing things like local council where citizens can participate, right? Where citizens can observe proceedings, citizens can question, or where citizens can demand that the budgets are made available, that the development plans have to be discussed with that particular community before being implemented, all of those things, right? So you need to make those kinds of changes to ensure that there's real accountability, not just upwards, but to the constituent, right? Then the other thing is actually, the other thing with our current political culture is, I think we would perhaps all agree that many people get into politics today for the perks and the privileges, right? It's not the salary, trust me, right? It's everything else that comes with it. The power, the
Also
access, right? The commissions and everything else, right? So those have to be done away with, so that people actually only do politics because they see that as a vocation. They see that as actually it's a service, right? So you wouldn't do that you're not getting into politics because you think you can make money out of it, right? And the only way you can do that is by changing certain laws, bringing in codes of conduct.
And the culture change in the culture.
Yeah, and that is also the responsibility of every political party to enforce that code of conduct.
But to deliver that, don't you think that we need to address things that happened in the past?
Absolutely.
Now, us as a group, we've been talking about the various scams and even things like the justice for the Easter bombing victims, transitional justice for issues from the time of the war or towards the end of the war and all of that. Now, another misconception, or maybe this is something you can address, is that without accountability for those things, we can't expect people to edit their behavior because there's no way that they will be, they feel like they're enabled. They feel that there's a culture of permissiveness to engage in that kind of thing. The story about the files, right? Now, the JVP had these files that, we saw at press conferences and all of that. And that was brought up as a way of highlighting all the issues, all the corruption issues and things in the past. Of course, the JVP also formed a government. I mean, I think at one point the JVP did support
the Chandrika Bandar. So when there
coalition
was,
and there were some coalitions and things like that.
Yeah.
How
part of the government for 1 year.
Right. So I think there is a certain amount of skepticism that the the NPP will be able to deliver. Now, all these files, people ask, what happened to the files? Why is nothing happening with the files? Right? Am I in asking that? So, how would you address those issues?
So I'll tell you
and how
what
do you
happened
bring
with the
justice
files.
to all of that?
Well, one of the pledges we have made is that we will prosecute those who have been accused of corruption,
Yeah.
right? What happened to the files? Well, in our country, the judicial, I don't know whether there are any lawyers here, so pitch in, please. But one of the things is that in our country, we don't have in our system this public interest litigation process, right? So the cases we have to be actually, the prosecutor is always the state, right?
Sorry,
Yeah.
quickly. What was just adjudicated recently, where the
Supreme Court determination, that was
determination.
a FR petition that was filed by a group of citizens. Supreme Court gave I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
Supreme Court gave a determination. What happened thereafter?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. Only a fine. That's it.
There's not even a fine.
Not even a fine? Unless they had to pay costs or something.
No, yeah, the cost to the petitioner, some
Yeah.
piddly amount, right? I mean, that's some piddly amount that was paid. That was a legal cost.
Carry more than that in their purse, so they
Yeah, I mean, that's probably just like
Pocket change. Pocket
right?
change.
So nothing happened because who has to then act on that determination? The government, right? So if the government, not today actually, why I got late was also because today was the vote on the presidential office expenses. This includes pensions and other sort of the privileges that are given to past presidents, right? So our contention was that here this includes presidents who've been named as responsible for the economic crisis. So why is the taxpayer continuing to pay their pensions, maintain them in fancy houses down Baudalokamavata, guard them, pay their bills and do all of these things? So we wanted a vote on it to say at least that part of it has to be done away with. Obviously we lost, right? But I mean it was the principle of the thing, right? So that's what I'm saying, right? So who needs to then take action on all of this? The government.
Yeah.
So when the Yahapalana,
That's you. You just saw that, isn't it?
the Yahapalana government was in power, they've had this FCID, the Financial Crimes Investigation. All of these files were handed over to them, or the files that were there up to that point, right? You know what happened to those? Nothing.
Yeah.
And the subsequent government, after the government change, set up a commission, and then in the commission, Anura Kumara Disanayaka plus Vasanta Samaya, all those people who handed over the files was accused of political vendetta, and there was that whole sort of commission that came up, and then subsequently all the cases were
Buried.
right? So you can't prosecute or you can't take action unless there's a government that's willing to do that, right? And that's the promise that we are making.
Political will. It needs
The political will. We will prosecute. We will act on those files.
Yeah.
To other, because I mean the file we have evidence. I mean there are lots of cases that went quite close to actually delivering a sentence, and then mysteriously.
Well, I mean, either
right?
the investigators are changed, or there's a wrong filing, and eventually all the cases get dropped, and then
Well, FCID no longer exists, right? But
Even the bribery commission, I think it's the funding.
think about it. I'm going to name names now, right? Is Ranil Wickremesinghe going to actually prosecute Mahinda Rajapaksa or Nama Rajapaksa or right? How can he? How can you be in the same government and then, do this? That's not going to happen.
Yeah, we're going to play a clip later on how he's
Right?
going to do that.
So,
May I ask two questions? One is going back to what Chavinda asked. Is stuffed with political appointees, and it's, some huge percentage more than they actually require to run them. How will you deal with, what will you do to reduce the number of people? Because the public sector salaries, I think, is a huge chunk of the government expenditure. That's my first question. My second question is, there is institutionalized corruption, I think, in every corporation and department. Where would you begin? Where would you begin if you came into government to clean it up? Thank you.
the first one was the overstaff.
Yeah.
We can't sack people. I mean, that's not realistically possible. That's not going to happen. But, however, we can stop the recruitment. I mean, stop.
You can freeze.
Yeah. No, well, I don't mean even freeze, because let me again explain this. If you look at where the political appointments and the political influence has been in terms of appointments, it is in positions which are for those who don't come through any kind of specific competitive exam, or any sort of where the recruitment procedure is loose, right? So you will have an abundance of drivers, peons, vaguely named position, development assistant, God knows what that's supposed to mean or what they're supposed to do. Every critical government agency has vacancies in the actual cadre, right? So you look at directors, you look like where people with actual technical skills are required, there are vacancies, right? So yes, we are overburdened, but we are also having these vacancies of the critical positions, right? So it requires a reorganization of all of these positions and people. What we are proposing is like a performance monitoring kind of scheme, where if you don't perform, you will be penalized, right? That mechanism will have to be brought into the public sector, so that there will be performance targets that everyone has to meet.
But how do you do that in reality with
the strategy of doing that?
Because everybody's unionized, and the unions have political affiliations. So it's, I understand, yes, performance. This is what we do in the private sector too, right? If we want to, right size an organization, you bring in the performance evaluations and then you cull. But that's not realistically possible when you really think about how the unions function as an extension of political parties, right?
So here's the thing. One thing I think we have to acknowledge, that unions are not in and of itself horrible, bad things.
Absolutely
unions
not.
are necessary. Unions are part of civil society, right? Secondly, we will not come to power unless a majority of government, public sector employees actually vote for us, right? So
fair, I suppose.
that means that we have not been shy about saying these things, right? What we plan to do and how we plan to do it. We have not hidden that. So if they vote for us, this is the government they are getting, right? So that means they have consented to this. We have a mandate to do this, right? Which we will enforce. Thirdly, we have also already started conversations with people within all those critical state institutions to ask them, how do we reform this? How do we make sure that these institutions actually start functioning again, like customs, inland revenue, all of those critical institutions, right? So you need to also actually engage with the staff there, because let me tell you, they are extremely frustrated also. I mean, not every public sector employee is happy not doing work or unskilled. There are incredibly bright people in the public sector, incredibly committed people who just are sick of not being able to do their job, right? So those people have to be motivated and given the backing to do what they should be doing. How do you make that change from the top, right? If the minister in charge is willing to work with the officials, if the minister in charge is not corrupt, is not going to take the commissions, is going to refuse the perks, that the multiple vehicles and the whatevers that come with your position, then it's very difficult for those below you to
comply your idea.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. So to do all of that, I mean, yes, reforming
Yeah.
institutions, that's
Yeah.
important, but
Yeah.
don't you think in the long term, the
Yeah.
solution is in developing a robust sort of an economy,
Of course. Yeah,
private
yeah,
sector participation, investment coming in. So
Yeah.
having, I mean, the last time something significant happened of that nature was when the garment industry was set up.
The government?
The garment industry was set
okay.
up. That was the last time
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
of that scale
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
there was a
Yeah.
society-wide
Yeah.
sort of
Okay.
benefit, and so don't you think we need that approach?
Absolutely.
So to get to that,
Yeah.
you need outward-looking sort of
Yeah.
policies,
Yeah.
and also bringing the economy to a footing where we are once again sort of self-sufficient to be able to deal with sort of monetary and fiscal sort of deficiencies that we're facing right now. So basically, to do that, we need the IMF. I mean, that seems to be the general contention. The IMF seems to be seen as a tool to bring stability. What is the NPP view on IMF, on the IMF, and what would the NPP do to stimulate economic growth, rather than this sort of inward-looking, sort of policies that we had under the Rajapaksas?
Okay. So IMF has not necessarily brought stability anywhere where there has been economic crisis, even in the past, right? If you look at countries that they have come into, those economies went through, the societies went through major upheavals, right? Greece, Argentina, right? Two examples that come to mind immediately. We would have preferred not to go through the IMF path, right? Because we don't necessarily think that those austerity measures and those harsh kinds of conditions that have been set necessarily help in the short term, but in the long term don't necessarily stimulate growth. That's our view.
So
right?
no IMF at all?
Wait, hang on, right? But if you are saying no to IMF, then there have to be things that you have done, right? Once you have gone down this path, there is no way that you can avoid IMF, right? And IMF is here, whether we like it or not, right? We would have preferred not to go down the bankruptcy path and have to take these conditions on board, but now they're there, right? So we would have to work with IMF. But what we would want to renegotiate some of those conditions, right? And mainly the conditions that, some of the targets that have been set, we think are unrealistic in that they put far too much pressure on the economy, because you're only thinking of the macroeconomic indicators and the stability at that level, but you're not thinking about how you're going to stimulate growth. Right? So right now, what are you finding? You're finding that our economy is stagnant because we are not able, average citizen is, forced to spend most of their income on bills and on consumer goods. So where is the stimulus to the economy, right? That has to come from somewhere also, right? So then the government also has a role to play in stimulating that. And if the government is also handicapped in doing that, then what's going to happen? Right, then we go back to the same situation of loans, right? And you're down that same path again, right? So we would want to renegotiate some of those conditions. We think that in the short term, right? We are crunching numbers right now, and I'm terrible with numbers, so I cannot confidently come and tell you these numbers. But I mean, in the short term, we have no other options but to increase our remittances and increase our tourism sector as the sort of
Remittances
remittance,
from workers, overseas workers.
Foreign inward workers' remittances, as sort of ways in which to, keep the economy going, right?
Yes.
We have a plan of sort of selecting certain sectors where we think we need to invest in, bring in foreign investment also, and the foreign investment could be because we lack the capital or because we lack the technology, right? So those are the areas in which we need to attract investment, but those have to be carefully selected and targeted, right? So looking at where are the growth potentials, what are the areas where we can enter the global market, right? So you talked about the apparel industry. That happened in the 80s. We're still at the same level in the apparel industry.
Yeah.
If we should at least have been able to go to the next level of that apparel industry, not just simply be where we were when we, like
We've
bigger.
gone backwards, no? We've actually.
Right. I mean, this is maybe a bit far-fetched, but couldn't we have pushed for becoming like one of the fashion capitals in the world, like really investing in fashion technology, in identifying what those areas are and quickly putting ourselves in a position where we can compete, right? So for us, what are the potentials? We still think that there is potential in our agriculture sector, but not tea, rubber, coconut, right? I mean, okay, fine, tea, brand, yes, all of that, but there's so much more that can be done. There's so much untapped potential, right? I mean, just think of our Kitul industry. What have we done with it, right? What have we really promoted in? I mean, I was recently on my way somewhere and I stopped for a cup of tea in a little shop that was basically just Kitul products, right? Amazing stuff. Badly packaged, badly marketed. You wouldn't stop there unless you were actually, looking for it, right? And then when I asked them about where do they get their Kitul from, it's still sort of, it's not grown as commercially, right? So, I mean, I'm just giving I was just thinking, why on earth aren't we exploiting this? I mean, exploiting is the wrong word perhaps, but why aren't we investing in this kind of thing much more, right? That's one area. Then what about like the wellness sector? We have like all this Ayurveda, meditation. I mean, look at Gwyneth Paltrow and her nonsense. Why can't we? I mean, I'm not saying we should become Gwyneth Paltrow's whatever stuff that she's talking about, but that's catering to a demand in the world, right? I mean, look at how much that has, and we have so much of that. Why can't we invest in like doing some of that? Like, packaging our kotamali in a more sort of, brandable way, or all those other products that we take for granted here, right? The whole wellness industry that we can capture. So we need to look for new and innovative areas. And then we also have our human resources, right? Not just to send people off somewhere, but, to, supposing it's in the IT sector, AI, all of these stuff, that people would come in and seek to set up things here so that we can grow in those areas, right? Our fisheries, our ocean resources, completely untapped. We're still importing fish. We're surrounded by an ocean and we are importing fish.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at our import costs, vegetables,
coconuts
spices, and fish are some of the consumer goods that we are importing. Why? Right? So there needs to be, I'm like going from thing to thing, but there needs to be also some rethinking about what we import, how we import, and some controls may have to be brought in. And perhaps we won't be able to import V8s for a really long time, right? I don't think our economy or our environment can afford to do those kinds of things, right? If you look at like the last, well, since about 2014, the biggest expense has been on vehicles. That's where most of our dollars have gone, and the fuel for those vehicles, right?
Most of them, I'm assuming most of those vehicles are used by very few.
Very few.
people.
So like the public transport has gone from bad to worse, and there are few people using these fuel guzzling vehicles, 2-3 per person, right? I mean, can we as a country afford this? Obviously we couldn't, right? And we can't for the foreseeable future, and we shouldn't anyway. They're environmentally really damaging as well, right? So, so it's like a rethink about how the economy should work and how the economy, what are the sectors that we need to invest. So it's actually having a plan.
Yeah.
It's actually about having a plan. It's about having a plan that is not about, roads. I can make money, so let's build roads, right? That's the basis on which decisions were made in the past. Which are the areas through which I can get the most commissions? Let's build airports that nobody flies into. Let's build harbors that nobody brings ships into. What about turning those ports into service centers, right? Where's the investment there? We haven't done that, right?
So whether it's about delivering justice or holding people accountable or bringing in a new economic vision, you need to be in power, right?
Yes.
So under the way things are, do you feel like that is a realistic possibility? I mean, of course, we've all seen the rallies and the numbers and all of that. I think the swing left is generally something that happens during an economic crisis anyway. I think you're seeing that here. And also the motivation to punish. I think maybe the NPP is seen as the best possible path towards that. But obviously governing, is a lot harder than being in opposition. But to do that, you need to actually get into power. If there is no path for you to form a government on your own, which I know that you're confident, right? Because we've spoken to a few other members as well, that you have the numbers to do that. If it doesn't happen, are you open to the possibility of a coalition? And and what would that look like?
Yes, but it can't compromise our anti-corruption stand and our promise on prosecution. Right?
But I think that will be easy to sell because I think everybody will buy that, right?
No, in the sense that who we go into a coalition with.
Who do you ally with?
Who do we ally with?
Yeah.
We can't ally with the people who we want to prosecute.
Yeah. But
Right?
generally everybody comes in saying they want to do that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Very few people do.
Right?
Yeah.
So that would be the barrier.
Right.
That would be the barrier. And which essentially means everyone else who has been in power.
Right.
Right? But there are those who haven't been in power. There are parties in parliament currently who, like us, have not been in power. But there's potential for alliances there, right? If there are people who are willing to come and confess before the public and give back the wealth that they stole and redeem themselves, we will,
I don't think. No,
right? But we cannot compromise on that, right? Because if we compromise on that, we will not survive for a day.
No, because
Right?
I think us as a group. Sorry, go ahead, Tess.
I was just thinking, we all agree that now is the elections. Now we heard today that we are living in hope that next year we're going to have 2 elections. How credible do you think that information is? What is the feeling amongst the parliamentarians and so on? Yes.
We remain somewhat skeptical for the reasons that if we are the party that's going to be elected, we still think there'll be resistance. For the reasons, obvious reasons, for obvious reasons, right? I don't think any of those people who have whose files we have are going to just sit back and say, okay, fine, let them come to power. That's not going to happen. So what is the how do we make sure then that those elections are held? That's where public opinion and public pressure comes in, right? Which is what we have been working on really hard for the last 2 to 3 years, right? Really working at the grassroots level in mobilizing people, in educating people, and so this shift that has happened towards us didn't happen automatically.
Right.
It's not just a trend. Yes, the anti-establishment mood has helped, but we've also worked incredibly hard, going to the grassroots levels and educating people and in a way popularizing the narrative of the need for anti-corruption measures, for prosecution of those who have stolen our money.
Right.
All of those slogans are actually slogans that we also believe in.
Well, I think us as a group, we came together as a group after the Aragale. I mean, that whole notion of system change, of course, to get rid of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and then the whole notion of system change. So do you think that those are realistic possibilities in maybe 1 or 2 election cycles? For example, would the NPP, for example, abolish the executive presidency? Would that be something that the NPP would do? Because that is something that we as a group all believe would be a positive step for the country.
Abolishing the executive presidency has been something we've campaigned from, those who were partners of the NPP, like the JVP, like the breakaway LSSP groups, right?
Right.
Have campaigned on that from the day it was introduced.
Right.
And it's not going to change now, right? We do not think an executive presidential system works in this country. We actually want a new constitution, right? So for that, but that would also depend on the kind of government we are able to form, right? The amount of the extent of radical changes that we can bring in will depend on the composition of the how much support we can get. I mean, look at what happened. I refer again to Chile's example, which their not new any longer, but their president, also a left-wing progressive guy, promised a new constitution, and came up with a really progressive constitution, and the right wing voted it down, and they lost the referendum on the new constitution. So this incredibly progressive constitution got rejected, right? Because the people of the country were not ready for that level of change. Similarly, it's not a similar example, but somewhat similar is what happened in New Zealand, right? Jacinda Ardern's government was a very progressive government, especially on social issues. Not so much economic, but certainly on social issues, right? But look at what happened recently. There was a huge backlash against Jacinda herself and her government, and now there's a right-wing coalition that is in power. Again, because the society was not ready for the kinds of changes that the government proposed, right? And there was a backlash. So, these things have to be managed also, because otherwise the backlash can be worse than what you're actually trying to do, right? You can result in reverse. Look what happened in Argentina recently, right? Where there's a complete madman who's now elected president.
Right. Yes. Right? He's actually a madman.
Who actually makes Trump look sensible. Right.
Yeah.
So So I mean,
So what I thought was, is there any other questions I have one more question, and then I thought we as a group, we have come up with a set of things that we would like to see, kind of manifest in terms of system change.
Right.
Maybe we could just go through that with you, and you
Sure.
can tell us whether you line up with that or you don't,
Yeah.
or if there's an alternative.
Right.
But before that, we had the budget presented. Again, like certain allocations have gone up. I think military spending again has gone up, and so on. We have a very large military. I mean, that is part of our overall expenditure. What is your take on the budget, and how would the NPP tackle military spending?
Military has to be down. I mean, there's no way we can afford that kind of budget and that kind of expenditure on the military, while we also want to increase expenditure on things like health and education. Someone has to give, and the someone will have to be the military,
Yeah.
right? I mean, some of the expenditure is not even about the salaries of the soldiers or the conditions of the. I mean, if you look at the condition again, there's a
Rather sad.
very sad, right? So again, if you look at, there's huge inequity in the spending in the defense budget, right? Where, things like that massive operation, the headquarter thingy that's at Akuregoda, right? And then you look at the life of an average soldier, vast difference, right?
Yeah.
So there are expenses that can be cut for sure, right? Because I don't think we need that level of
Extravagant
military
expense.
extravagance at this point in society, right? So there will have to be cuts. There will also have to be cuts on things like the government will have to be lean and mean, right? Limited number of ministries, limited ministers. I mean, we are proposing 25 ministries, which we would like to have 20, but given the current context and the amount of work that we will have to put in, we think 25 ministries and 25 deputy ministers, no state ministers and other whatnots,
Yeah.
right? We would ideally like to bring it down to 20,
Yeah.
right? So lots of government expenditure that also can be cut down on, rather than sell off the Nuwara post office. Why not sell off some of the presidential mansions in every province, right? I mean, who's using those? Whereas the Nuwara post office is an iconic thing, right? And people actually know it. Do you also know that there's a mansion in Jaffna, Anuradhapura, Hambantota, every province, every major location? Why not sell some of those off, right? I mean, if you want to go to Hambantota, the president can always stay in a hotel or a circuit bungalow or whatever it is, right? So, I mean, making the, sorry?
Carlton House.
I'm not sure we'll be welcome.
Welcome there.
Yeah. So, yeah.
The president of Malawi, who are going through a similar situation of bankruptcy like Sri Lanka, he has actually ruled that all the government ministers and all take 50% cuts on all their perks and everything. I think that's something which has to be done, because it's just ridiculous. And all overseas travel has been suspended.
Going to fix the economic problem, but the symbolic value, yeah.
Else. And these guys are just spending like there's no tomorrow.
We will do, and that will have to happen. I mean, that will happen. I mean, that's no.
And my pet peeve is that the voted for MPs to actually pay a lower tax rate than the rest of us. You all have your taxes capped. You have a cap on your taxes. You're not paying the same rate than the rest of us are. Yeah, it happened, and in fact the January one was, and in fact the January one, which was just, will you check on it, because it was in the media, and it even said that the January tax, which was deducted, was then refunded to them.
So I did check on that, whether this is true, and I mean the Parliament Financial Office told me that's not true, right? I know I get taxed, so yeah.
What was in the media, what we were told was that the tax was originally the same for everybody.
Yeah.
Thereafter, the things passed where it was reversed or reduced.
And capped at 17,000, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think that.
Yeah, on a value.
Well,
Okay, well, I think we'll try to clarify that. That is fine.
I mean,
Yeah.
No, I'm
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I want to know, there are people in this country, I mean, we have to know that like people have a very bad impression about tax in this country, because actually what we were taught when we were in school was taxes are actually a investment, right? That the state will give back in service more. But that is not happening in the country, in a country where corruption is rampant, and it's basically taxes become the source of the daylight robbery. So now if we are, and also I think, does the MPP have a policy in this regard with regard to transparency of where the tax money goes to? Will that be established by the NPP once they come to power, if they come to power? And is there a system where now I have friends who are paying their taxes now, they have started paying taxes, and they have a negative balance in their payslip. Basically, they have to pay their loans, they have to pay the taxes now that on top of that, and the other commitments that are being cut off, then there is a zero salary to their hand. So will the NPP establish a norm, basically go above a certain limit of a salary, so that, people can live at least? I mean, policy decisions change in countries. Time to time, there will be changes in policy decisions. But if people can't afford it, then they have to, they have to have something for them to live. I mean, something has to give. Either the taxes have to be reduced, or what they are paying for interest payments and paying back loans, they have to be reduced. Something has to give. I mean, will the state turn and say, I don't care about how you live, you will have to pay the tax of this much? Will there be a flexible system in place, especially when there is a transition like this, sudden?
Also the indirect taxes like VAT, which disproportionately affects poor people. So is there a...
Yeah, no, I mean, we also think that the indirect, this is a conversation that has gone on for years, that it's the indirect taxes that are causing the real pain, right? So in terms of direct taxes also, again, there's a lacuna there, in that personal income tax gets captured, but corporate tax doesn't get paid quite as it should, right? So there are lots of loopholes in the system through which actually the tax, it's the person who gets directly taxed, like your pay gets, they are the ones who really pay the taxes, right? So our tax collection system needs to change drastically and improve drastically, so that there's a fairer distribution of how taxes are collected. So it's not the people who have no choice about paying taxes who always end up paying the taxes, right? Whereas others can find loopholes, right? That's one thing. And like I said before also, yes, you need taxes to run a country, and those taxes have to come back as services. That's where I said that we would reinvest those in things that are the sectors that are service oriented and related to enhancing people's growth potential, like health, education, things like that, sports, right? Cultural life. That's something that we don't talk about enough, but something that's really needed in our country. For people to really flourish and develop and grow, you also need a healthy cultural life, and we have very few options in Sri Lanka, right? So so all of those. The other thing about the negative, you end up with like paying and you don't have anything to live by. That's a real worrying concern. But there is it's complicated in that we also encouraged people to take out loans to live unsustainable lives for a long time. And now people are paying the price for that. We built houses.
Recently, the interest rates went up, then the tax came in.
Right, and that's part of the system we want to change, where these unsustainable lifestyles are promoted as a way of sustaining or making quick profits, say. And I remember a time when, it was much harder to get a credit card or much harder to get a loan. Right now, then there was latterly a period where there are things called lifestyle loans. You could take loans out for a wedding. Who takes a loan out to have a wedding? Right? But these things, right? Yeah. But these things became part of our lifestyle, which we simply cannot afford.
And the banks were literally giving
and
you
the banks
credit
were
cards.
literally giving. We had people, when I was working at the university, on a weekly basis, banks would come to us saying, would you like a second credit card? And I was like, no, what would I do with a second credit card? Right? And they would look at me very strangely and say, why not?
Yeah.
Right? But I grew up in a kind of a family environment where like getting into debt was a horrible thing, and that's like really ingrained in me, right? But that's not how you're supposed to live your life. You're supposed, getting into debt is acceptable, became much more acceptable, right? And then when the crash happened, right? You have a really harsh wake-up call, right? So we do think that in this current situation, the 36% is a little too high, right? Because we are in the midst of, like you said, you can't like take everything away in taxes and then what are you leaving people to live on, right? Yeah. So we would lower that under an NPP government. Our suggested rate is 24%, right? But we would still have to have taxes. But we would make sure that those taxes then come back so that you don't then also end up paying for everything else. You pay taxes, but you also have to pay for health, you also have to pay for education, you also have to, you also have to bribe your way into getting your electricity connection and your phone connection and your building permit passed and everything else. No, right? So that, that contradiction we will eliminate. But we would also have to rethink our lives a little bit and learn to live more sustainable lives.
So we've almost come to 1.5 hours.
Right.
2 questions. Anybody else have any questions? So 2 questions. Okay, go ahead.
Now you mentioned a lot of changes that you are going to do when the NPP comes. Have you all really strategized these things or trying to do it when we come to power?
No, we are strategizing, as in we are coming up with concrete. That's what I said. Even with
Chaturanga has the blueprint.
Chaturanga has the blueprint. Chaturanga and others are crunching numbers to kind of talk about the numbers of what our expected levels of growth would be and where our sources of income would be and how much we can afford to spend on education in our first year. So all of those things are being worked out. But also don't forget that we are working in the dark, right? We don't know, there are certain, like our public debt, for example, we don't really know how that debt has been used and what is going on, right? So one of the things we would need to do is a real audit also, a debt audit to see what.
Also, if you look at the budget this time, it's again back to deficit spending.
Exactly.
There is no revenue to match the expenditure. So again, you're going in, which means that gap needs to be funded.
The revenue comes from selling resources and taking loans and taxes.
Right. So in a way that the IMF was needed to get access to international markets again.
Yeah.
So we build debt some more. So that seems to be the way we govern.
Yeah.
2 quick questions.
Yeah.
And then we can decide to I think end if you like, or we can just quickly run through the the system change objectives.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
if that's
we'll run
okay.
it. Yeah.
I know there are no easy answers to either of these, but if you can give us a quick answer. One is about the NPP stance on private universities. I think, right, the student unions are pretty much against that, but I think public opinion is the other way. If there are, right now there's a lot of outflow in terms of Sri Lankan studying overseas anyway, and how would you look at that problem? And the other thing is, one area that we don't hear much from the NPP is on the national question about reconciliation, transitional justice for issues in the north and east. What is the strategy of the NPP on these two?
Right, there are no quick answers to either one of those. So on education, our emphasis is on investing in general education. That's where, as a government, we will focus on, because we think a lot of the problems in our education system is based on this really bad general education system we have, right? So if you ask us where would we focus our attention on, it will be on general education. With regard to private universities, here's the thing. Private educational institutions are in existence. So when the NPP comes into power, are we going to shut them down the next day? We can't and we won't, right? However, we think that there needs to be a regulatory mechanism in terms of the quality as well as the fees that are being charged, right? But as a government, our emphasis is on making sure that your economic position doesn't determine your access to a quality education. Although there are more and more people accessing private education right now, that's because they simply don't have a choice of a good quality state education. It's not necessarily because they can afford to. A lot of people are mortgaging houses, selling land, doing all kinds of things in order to educate their children privately, and that's not acceptable.
Or overseas.
Or overseas. Yeah. That's not acceptable, right? That shouldn't be the choice that people have, right? We want to make sure that there's a really good public education system. If people still want to pay for their education, and we're certainly also not going to stop people from going abroad for their education. That has always been in existence. I mean, people in the US go abroad for education. Why on earth would we stop Sri Lankans from going abroad for education? Right? That's an option that should be always made available to people. Right? That's a choice. That's a choice people make about where they want to get educated. Right? Our goal is to make sure that there is a top of the class public education system in this country. Trust me, when we go and talk to people, this question about private education only gets asked in Colombo. Only gets asked in Colombo. The question we get asked on education when we, actually if you even step out of metropolitan Colombo, is what are you going to do about our local school? Right? What are you going to do about my child who has got 2 A's and a B and cannot enter a state university? Those are the questions that we are asked, right? So we are not going to close down private universities, but that's not going to be, opening private universities is not going to be a priority. We don't see that as the answer to the education problem in our country.
Isn't it? We don't have foreign medical faculties here. That's what.
Existed, and for good reasons also. I mean, there's the real concern about the quality of the kind of private institutions that have tried to set up private medical faculties, right? And many of these things that call themselves universities are not universities and should not be called universities, right? So that's the private education answer. What was the second?
General education. Are you talking about university education as well? Are you only talking up to A levels, or are you talking about university? Because the current government, state-run universities does not have capacity. It's very limited capacity. What is the percentage of A level students that have a if you do not, if you are not encouraging foreign investment in universities, how will you deal with that?
On this, right? So I try to keep it short.
Yeah.
But that problem lies in the in our education structure, right? Where the only options that young people have in terms of higher education, viable options, options that will make their lives better, to either become an engineer or a doctor. That's where the capacity problem comes in. It's not kids who want to be doctors who become doctors, or kids who want to become engineers who become engineers. That's the only path for social mobility in this country. Okay, we can like widen it a little bit and now include IT, right? For us to change that, that change has to come in the general education structure, where much more emphasis has to be on vocational and professional education, where that pathway becomes opened up right from school, so that not everyone thinks you have to enter university and become a doctor in order to succeed in life.
Where do you go to become an electrician or a plumber?
Where do you, a professional electrician, a professional plumber, media studies, film studies, create the creative industry, a psychologist, a social worker, all those other options, right, that should be made available. So what we are proposing is like a two-track system in the general education system, which will follow through to the higher education system, where we've identified about 6 sectors where those professional and vocational streams will be introduced in school, and hopefully about 60% would be choosing that stream rather than the university stream. But in that vocational and professional stream also, we would propose being able to even become a graduate in that selected area, right? But that professional and technical education stream, we see a much closer collaboration with the industry, right? There can be industry investment in it because it has to be much more job oriented, much more oriented to the needs of the industry. So in terms of curriculum development, but also in terms of investment, there can be a much closer collaboration. But the other path will be about actually developing our university system into research universities, where there's an emphasis also on research and development and innovation. And we actually also start producing postgraduate students, and it's not only undergraduate students that we are catering to, right? So that is our plan in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the academics stuff, I think we can go on and on. I think that's an area that of interest for you, right? Particularly.
Yes.
But on the national question,
No,
the other one,
question, yes.
would the NPP believe in, like, for example, the full implementation of the 14th Amendment?
13th Amendment.
13th Amendment that created the.
Okay.
And how would you on the reconciliation stuff?
So for us, the main reason why there's a national question is because we have had successively racist governments.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Who have not ensured that sort of majoritarian view of government isn't practiced. Every government has maintained that majoritarian culture, right, where then minorities feel left out and excluded from power and from every other sphere, right? So we want to fundamentally change that. How do we fundamentally change that? Whether it's language rights, cultural rights, all of those rights have to be fully made available to all. There cannot be second-class citizens in our country, right? Where somebody feels that just because you're a Tamil or a Muslim or a Burgher, you cannot aspire to the highest office of this country, right? That's something that you automatically shut off as an avenue for you. That can't be, right? And we think that a government then has that responsibility to make sure that the state doesn't, maintain that hierarchy, right? And the other thing is that we will not use religion and race as a political weapon, right? Because again, that's how the national question was constructed, because it was used for politics and it was used for votes, right? But there's also a problem in our country. We don't think the 13th Amendment met the aspirations of the minorities for which it was given as a answer to the national. We don't think it answered the national question. It was like a stopgap kind of measure, right? So, like I said, we are proposing a new constitution through which devolution of political and administrative power will be included. The unit of devolution is something that we think we need to discuss and come to some consensus on.
So no federal system or something completely different?
I think we need to look at it in new terms. I mean, if the minute you say federal system in this country, there'll be a uproar, right? And I mean, what's the point of creating an uproar just for the, I mean, why give ammunition for creating that kind of division? I think we also need to look at new ways, new narratives, new concepts, new ideas, right? And not like keep going back to the old. And we also think that the fundamental changes we propose will address a lot of those issues that are currently not being addressed, right? That across the board we think need to be addressed, right? But till a new constitution comes in, and till then the 13th Amendment will have to be implemented. That means the provincial council system has to be in place. We don't necessarily think that's the solution, but that's the solution that has been offered to
with police powers?
A politicized police force which is devolved will cause more problems than anything else, not in the north and east, but in the south. Right? So the first step is to depoliticize the police. Right? And under a depoliticized police, there's no problem with the powers being, but a highly politicized police. Can you imagine all these provincial council members who then not only at the top but at every level get to manipulate the police? I mean, you'll have like little Deshabandhus everywhere, right? So, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a good way to go. So I think you have to like make the police force independent before you talk about devolving it.
Right. So we need something like back to the 19th Amendment with the independent commissions and things like that. So I think the broad discussion can we end there? And can we take 5 minutes to quickly run through our system change objectives?
Yeah.
You can tell us whether you agree, don't agree,
Yeah.
or maybe propose something else.
Yeah.
Right. So as a group, we sort of sat and came up with a few things. And the first thing we acknowledge that this is a long-term project. I mean, I think this is not something that's going to happen overnight or in one election cycle. But we feel that reintroduction of the 19th Amendment obviously can be reintroduced. Will bring some sort of accountability. Would you agree with that? All those multiple commissions that were there, I think that are not the Election Commission, the Public Services Commission, National Police Commission, Audit Service Commission, Human Rights.
I may be getting my numbers wrong because I've lost track of the amendments, and I
think we are 23
a little
now.
too, like my brain is shutting down.
23, no?
Yeah, I think it's the 18th Amendment. No? Because
19th was the one that
Mahinda brought.
19th was the one that brought in all the independent.
Was the
Independent Commission.
No, was the one
sorry,
that-
that's the 17th.
Yeah, the 18th is the one that this repealed all the executive powers.
Yeah, you're right. So it
18th
was the
is the one that
17th that brought in the independent commissions.
Yeah.
18th repealed the independent commissions. 19th brought it back in. Then 20th
Yeah.
repealed again.
Also,
and
Constitutional
21st
Council was created, all of that under the
Sorry,
19th.
17th was what brought the independent commissions in.
Right.
And may I just point out that was proposed, and that was one of the conditions for the JVP to join the Chandrika government at that time, that they will bring in the 17th Amendment.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Little bit of
Okay. All right.
some of the misconceptions about what the JVP has done.
So the 19th,
Yeah.
would you be happy to go back to that at least? Because, I mean, we agree that we need to change the constitution because a constitution that allows an unelected person to reach the highest office of the land clearly has a hole in it, which is it's a vanilla size hole in it, let's say.
Yeah.
Then abolishing the executive presidency, I think we already agreed on that. Obviously, end to systemic corruption, eliminate corrupt practices. That will have to start with bringing people to account. To do that, you have to change certain laws, like you said, right? which means you have to get into power to do that. But is this something that you would do?
Which one?
The first one.
Yeah.
Recover assets.
Yeah.
People should
No
have.
argument.
Do you think that's something that's doable, recovering stolen assets? We hear about it a lot, but is that something that you feel is doable under?
It's certainly doable to some extent. I wouldn't say everything that we can recover everything, but I think we can recover certainly some, and certainly some of the personal wealth.
Right.
But you need audits, and you
Yeah.
need there are things, but there are international processes also that help in doing that. Things like the STAR program, which
we're a signatory to, right?
Which we are a signatory to. So yeah.
Okay. Then we also see that the root cause of all political ills is current electoral system. Are you happy with this proportional representation system, or do you feel that needs to be changed to change the political culture? Because we feel barriers to entry for anybody who's interested in politics.
It's not the PR system that's the barrier. The barrier is the cost of elections.
Okay.
Right.
So under this current system, do you think?
So for that, I mean, for that to change, that's why I would see for some of what you're saying that the problem lies in the political culture, where even in a PR system, if you are pitted against each other, and how you contest depends on the amount of money you bring into the campaign, that's the problem there.
But even if the culture changes, you still need money,
Yeah, but you can also manage them. You can limit the expenditure. You can manage how election campaigns are run. You can have that much more transparency. You can build in all kinds of safeguards, right?
Yeah.
Because PR system is also what enabled minority parties to have representation in parliament.
Yes. No, we understand.
Right?
I mean, the context we understand.
So doing away with that would lead to other kinds of problems, right? So perhaps a mixed method, right?
Also, I suppose those contesting, if they know that
elected to office, they can't make money and they can't recover that. There won't be that many people contesting in the first place, and they won't be throwing that much money around anyway.
Exactly.
Then, having seen what happened in Parliament yesterday, ethics is something that's necessary. I mean,
there is a code of conduct. The problem is implementation,
right?
So I mean, I think there are lots of laws. It's implementing, right? So the problem is with the implementation and not with the lack of any of these things.
So, and do you think asset declaration alone would be enough?
No, asset declaration is already mandatory.
Yeah, but
what should be mandatory is an audit of your asset. So that there's some, I can say anything and submit my asset declaration. If nobody checks it, what's the point?
Right.
So there needs to be a system where your assets are actually checked, right? So for instance, how did Sanat Nishanta come up with 2.4 million to pay his friend's bill? Right?
Yeah.
Certainly not on a minister's
explain
salary. So explain some of these discrepancies.
I mean, we know children of certain politicians who have no employment, living very lavishly.
Yeah. So I mean,
they need to explain.
They need to explain. So there needs to be that.
Right.
The asset declaration in and of itself will not be will not curb corruption.
Right. So we also said political leaders with principles. I mean that's a given. I think And the next one, as you mentioned, it's not the lack of laws, is the implementation. So I think we agree on. Of course.
The level of education is something that I'm a little hesitant about.
That's why I said education or accomplishment. So if you're a activist or in a particular field or you're a specialist.
I mean there have been people who
I think in a democracy you can't limit people.
No. And also education is not the only indication of being a good politician or being an ethical person either.
Right. Then we also said protect women and children. I think this is an area that you worked on particularly. Do you feel like being in a male-dominated party that you were given your space to craft a role for yourself in the NPP? And do you think we feel that the nomination process should give that equal right of place for women as men? Do you think that happens within the parties, in the party system?
Okay, so nomination per se is again not the answer, right? It is about making that political space much more accommodating of women, and that's harder to do, right? That requires again a change in that political culture that we keep referring to. So in the NPP, things that are, like nominating women and making sure there are women on stage and making sure there are women speakers in every rally is not the issue, right? I mean, that we can do, but making sure that there are women who can enter the process right from the grassroots level and work their way up, that requires harder work, and we've started it, but that's still work to be done there.
Okay. So the next 2 points is about education. I mean, we as a group feel that education should be at least 6% of GDP, and balance it off with military spending.
Probably not in the first year.
Maybe not.
But as a goal, yes, 6%.
Yeah. And then create a thinking population with education reform. I think you've already addressed it to a certain extent. So I think
I don't quite agree with the second part of your statement, but again, I would ask that we spend 2 hours talking on education. I'm not going to even start on that addressing.
Right. I think as a group we have a certain point of view, which might be not in tune with certain thinking. Electoral reform to address ethno-religious political parties and agendas. In that sense, we feel like there are capable people in the North and East that we will never get a chance to vote for. We personally admire people like Sumandaran and even Shanakian who've been here. Has NPP done enough to do outreach in the North and East, like creating a ground game in those areas where you attract more so that they're not reliant on just strictly ethno-religious parties?
Yeah, we've been working on that for several years now. I wouldn't say we have reached our target, but certainly the same structure that I explained that exists in the other parts of the country exists in the North and East.
So you have a structure in the North and East.
We have a structure in the North and East.
So we also say we need educated, accomplished people to enter politics. Party membership and nomination process must ensure this. We also qualify that by saying, especially at a local level, because we have seen, especially in the last 2-3 election cycles, I think especially since the Pohot tour became a political force that, dragging the political culture into the gutter starts we see at the Pradesh Sabha system. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, but I hate God. No, but I think it's also the way in which they do politics. It's patronage politics, right? So then you need a patron who brings in your local guy or girl, as it may be, to do your dirty work at the local level, and that's then your pathway to the top, right? So again, unless you...
But sadly, those are the guys that end up in parliament. I mean, we saw the behavior a few days
because you
ago.
have a patron, because that's how you survive in those parties.
Patronage, again, change in the culture. So we also feel that bogus ministries need to be reduced or got rid of. Crossover should mean the loss of a seat. And because otherwise that's where the political horse trading comes in. Would you agree that?
Agree.
Okay.
We actually proposed that in the 18th Amendment and we were voted down.
Okay. All right. And we also say
the crossover thing, that should be included in the 18th
But there was a recent
Amendment.
judgment by the Supreme Court, right, on the crossover. So I think we're still waiting for the other cases to be settled, but maybe that will set
that was actually a really good judgment.
Right. And we said one law for all. No one can be above the law because we see the selective application of the law. And we also see these bad laws coming in. Specifically, we feel to target certain groups and so on. So those are the main points that we feel.
Could you? Oh, sorry. Could you go back to your first page? There's one thing there that I didn't quite agree with, and maybe I need to.
Please.
Second one, right? The go home was the primary objective, now achieved. We also find against which are actually we don't think nepotism and dynastic politics are limited to the Rajapaksas, right?
Sure.
And that's where the limitation of the Aragale also lay in that we said go home, but we didn't think about what would happen after, right? And this idea that it's only one dynasty which has
there are many.
There are many, right? So I think we need to, and some of those dynasties come in very sophisticated, urbane suits,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which we also need to counter.
And dynasty
Right.
does not mean just the family.
Yeah.
Dynasty does not.
I mean, we see vote bank.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah,
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 that's
yeah.
why we feel we need
Yeah.
more of a thinking
Yeah.
population
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's mainly it.
Yeah.
Maybe you can react to this. Maybe you can react to this. We were quite amused by that.
Yeah.
What do you think is happening right now in politics? I mean, do you see him as an honest, independent sort of?
Who are you talking about?
The president, or where do you see the?
Seriously.
Seriously. Well, we had to get your view on it.
No, I mean, we see, when I was referring to that cosmopolitan, gentlemanly suited,
Yeah.
corrupt crook, I was referring to Ranil
To that only, right.
and his
There you go.
dynasty,
Okay.
right?
All right.
So I don't think there has to
Yeah.
be any doubt in,
Yeah. So-
as to my
we
view
talk
of-
about it every week, right? Chris
Yeah.
Chris usually
Yeah.
brings it up. We have a lot to say about that. We also generally recap all the different scams and issues that have been going on for the past so many years, from the killings of journalists to various things.
No, don't
And we
forget
keep-
Batalanda.
Right. So we keep, this is something that we do. I think we're fairly out of time now. Is there anything else that we can wind up? Because I think you've been very generous with your time, Harini. Thank you so much. Anything else that you need clarity about? No? So also every week we have Alicia who picks a couple of quotes
Okay.
that captures sort of whatever's going on in the moment. What about you guys? Any questions from that side? You're good? Okay. All right. You had a question.
She had asked if a presidential election comes up, as the president said, Ranil Wickremesinghe said, soon, who would be the candidate of NPP or Anu Disanayak? All right. Okay. Already said that. Thank you. All right. Thank you. That is a question somebody had sent to us to ask you.
All right, so the two quotes of the week. The worst evils which mankind has ever had to endure were inflicted by bad governments. Elected ones. Second one is, protesting is never a disturbance of the peace. Corruption, injustice, war and intimidation are disturbances of the peace.
So, Lisha, you always find the right quote for the, which is very apt in the moment, I think, especially in the moment that we're going through right now. So, Harini, thank you so much. You've been very, very generous with your time, like I said.
For the interesting conversation.
No, you're most welcome. I think we could have gone on, or delved into specific topics and all of that. I mean, it's hard to sort of but we needed to get a sense of where the NPP stood. And you're really the first, leader of the NPP that we have spoken. We have spoken before.
But I would also put on record that Kaushi, you said you've spoken to Kaushi, you've spoken to Chaturanga, you've spoken to Rai. They are all members of our executive council. So they are as much a leader of the NPP, leaders of the NPP. As
you are one of the most visible. So
you're sort of one of the faces of the.
But in our system, the member of parliament doesn't have any more power or whatever within the decision-making structures any of the others.
And
in that sense, we are equal.
Chaturanga is NPP, right?
Yes.
Whereas Rai is JVP.
Rai, yes.
And Kaushi is also JVP. Right?
No.
Oh no, Kaushi is also NPP.
Yeah.
So maybe we can bring Rai and have a chat with her specifically about some of the issues with the JVP. I think it might be easier to ask her. But so Thank you very much, Harini. Thank you for being here and on our 237th day at GGY. And thank you to the members of the group who are here as well. Thank you, Anu and CK, as usual, for putting it together. Chiranta for covering us as always. Anuruddha, who always helps put these things together. It's okay mentioning your name, right? It's too late. It's done. So that's a wrap from day 237 at GGY. And we'll be back at our usual street corner for 238 next to St. Teresa's Church in front of Health Guard on Sunday. So anybody who's in the area, please do join us. Show us your support. And we have changed our time. We're not doing it at 6 o'clock anymore. We've advanced the time to 4:30. So hopefully see you all there. And that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much. Good night.